We took a short break from the podcast to host Auto Enter Live, and so thank you to everyone who joined us for that event in July. If you missed it, we'll include a link in the show notes to find the recorded sessions on YouTube. All right, so back to the Context podcast. In this episode, I get to talk with Todd Geist and Angelo Luchi, both from Proof Geist, and we focus on 19.5 and the changes that it brought to the Claris platform. Well, we were going to start the podcast, but Todd disappeared. I'm just kidding.
I'm back. I'm back.
I started the timer, and so anyway, we'll put that in the bloopers. Todd stormed off. All right, ready?
Too much new stuff. Can't
Too
take
much
it.
new stuff.
Had to run out.
All right, so FileMaker recently released 19.5, and it's a pretty big release, and so we've got a lot to talk about. Why don't we start talking a little bit about FileMaker Server? That seems there were a lot of changes there. So Angelo, what are some of the things that you've dug into on the FileMaker Server side?
The biggest thing, Martha, is the support for Ubuntu 20. Ubuntu 18 is coming up on its end of life. 2023 is its end of life, and they needed to obviously extend that, so they moved to support Ubuntu 20, which will give us an end of life of 2025. In addition to that, it adds increased performance for boot up and availability by quite a bit. So that's a nice little feature there. And then on top of it, Ubuntu 20 gives us Nginx support,
that's right,
as opposed to Apache, and that itself is a good change as well. That's going to give us some more performant WebDirect and API transactions. So I'm excited about that.
They didn't do Nginx for Mac though, right? Just for Ubuntu?
Just for Ubuntu 20,
okay.
Yeah. And then
that's a good one. It's interesting. We're not used to this. These things, end of life 2025 isn't that far away, right? But that's how things move in sort of the cloud native space, where Ubuntu is a pretty core OS for a lot of what runs on the cloud. So it's probably going to have to get updated every couple of years. We'll get a whole new version.
Most definitely. Ubuntu has already released their 22 long-term support version. So that came out just a few months ago, and I'm sure Claris is going to eventually have to move to that within the next few updates.
Oh, interesting.
Groovy. So what else is a big change?
Yeah.
So with Ubuntu 20 and Nginx in there, WebDirect had a very large number of both bug fixes and performance increases done to it. One of the add-ons for WebDirect is the OAuth sign-in, so that can be scripted now. That's been a requested feature for some time, from our clients anyway. I've heard for this forever.
Yeah.
And then you can also finally hide the local accounts when you have OAuth enabled on your WebDirect login, which is, again, something that's been asked for forever.
Yeah, this gets rid of the double login that you might have had to do in the past, where you're logging in and then you have to log in again with OAuth into FileMaker WebDirect. This was a big problem at Netflix. They had a big WebDirect thing that we were doing with them, and they really needed that to be fixed. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of companies in that space. So it's a good one.
Yeah.
And
now,
then
one of my favorite bug fixes. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, one of the things that came with the OAuth is that now we can customize the login, right? The actual
right.
screen can be changed, so you don't get that double login
that's right.
problem.
As well as
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
You still have to do some extractions of the jar file and whatnot, but you can edit those files once they're extracted out.
Nice. Okay. All right, but I didn't mean to interrupt you. What are you excited about?
Sorry. So, favorite bug fix for WebDirect is exporting of container data. Anything that had a plus character or a space would fail on export when you were exporting data out. This is finally fixed. We've had so many people, submit support tickets and things like that after upgrading, and that issue was the bane of my existence for
Now was that
time.
in the field names or was that in the data?
That was in the name of the file that was in.
Oh, the name of the
the
file.
WebDirect container. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I
So if
see.
anyone, mhm.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's wild. I don't think I've ever hit that one.
Yeah, we've
I
had
get it.
several partners hit us with that one.
Man, it's I forget how our users often are thankful of little bug fixes, right? It's like,
right.
oh, this thing that's like bugging me for forever and I have to deal with it every day, and you're like, oh, it's like a 5-minute fix, let me go fix it real quick, and they're like, oh, then they'll sing your praises. And this just happened here on the other side, right? It's like, no, they fixed this little thing. And it's like and not to like undermine the amount of work that they put into fixing these things, but like something that is such a small feature, or at least can seem that way, can be totally a game changer.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be a big unlock for some companies or for some people.
Yeah.
Sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now the other feature I want to call out in this is parallel backups. This is an amazing addition to FileMaker Server. Traditionally, your backups were done sequentially, so we'd just take a look at your files and pause, back up, pause, back up, pause, back up, and release them as they go. Backups could take quite a bit of time to do. So now what FileMaker Server is going to be doing is it's going to look at the transactional data on the files from FileMaker Pro, from WebDirect, and it's going to sort of group those files based on the number of transactions that have occurred in them. And it will back up groups of those highly transacted files at a time down to the ones that have, few transactions. So we noted almost a 40% decrease in backup time on our busier instances with parallel backups enabled. Now, this also takes advantage of parallel write requests, which Automatic uses NVMe direct attached storage. We have an optimized storage system that FileMaker will take advantage of to do these backups, which is probably why we get a nice burst of speed and a decrease in backup time on our instances.
That's interesting.
Backups can be a pretty big deal for really large files, and it gets in the way of users getting their work done. Because it's not always going to be clear exactly how FileMaker Server is going to group those backups. Your performance boost could vary depending on the usage and the files, etc. Is that right?
Most certainly.
Yeah.
And that parallel backups will affect both progressive backups as well as your regular scheduled backups.
Pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool.
Lots of stuff on the. I'm looking at this list. There's still so many more things. What else? What's your next favorite?
Next favorite, it's a little thing, but it is a large thing when it comes to running server-side scripts. Is they've increased the default cache size on the scripting engine. Something that seems minuscule actually makes a really big difference in the performance of executing these routines, especially with large amounts of data that it needs to process through. 64 meg was the default on previous versions. It's up to 256 now. So, we are seeing better performance on running PSOS or FileMaker scheduled scripts. That has also helped some of our clients that have been running scripted ESS calls for processing things. So we've seen some benefits right there, and less memory leak, which has been nice as well.
Yeah. This one's actually a pretty big deal, and actually a number of these performance boosts on the server are a pretty big deal. One of the things we've been talking about a lot is modern workloads are actually done not by a person in many cases, are done on the server. Data is flowing in from various systems. It's being processed by various systems, being sent out to other systems. And so FileMaker can play a key role in part of that processing. And in those conditions, that's all happening on the server. So as you do more of this kind of automation, you're naturally going to be taking advantage more and more of the server. And so having a boost like this is really important. So this new file that we've released called SimpleQ is a nice way to move a lot of processing out of the user's hands and onto the server. So the user, their UI and their experience of the app can be much faster, while all that data processing is being handled by the server. So it's really great to get these boosts there, because we actually would like to move as much as we can to the server and have the server handle it really, really fast, because it has access to the data right there, right? It doesn't have to pass data back and forth to the client. So anything that we can get on the server, like there's another one summarizing, some of the summarizing things have been moved to the server, the scripting cache increase, any of that stuff is great. Make the server faster, and all of these background automated processes get faster too.
Todd, it was a couple of one of our first podcasts together. You had made the comment that we think of the FileMaker file as the center of what we do, but you have been pushing and pushing and reminding us all the time, in good form, that FileMaker's the server is really where the home base now, right? That's where the center of our work really goes.
It's the server. The server is the center. The server is the center. I mean, we're doing things in our own workflows that are processing our own data, where the FileMaker is actually handling a lot of the business logic, but there's very little UI. We've got stuff coming in, flowing through Auto into SimpleQ. SimpleQ is handing off to a few FileMaker files to do some processing, and then sending stuff on to the next stuff. There's very little user interaction in that. It's almost all being handled by the server. The users might have to go in and, like, if something doesn't work, they might have to check an error and resolve things. But that's just all happening. It's happening all day long. This has become a very powerful paradigm that we're going to be talking about more, because it simplifies things a great deal. And it doesn't require somebody sitting there like staring at a screen waiting for things to happen. Things are just happening. So yay for more performance on the server.
Yeah. And I think this version really, I remember when we talked about doing this podcast, it was like, well, what changes are happening? And both of you were like, it's a lot of server stuff, right? And I think it's just, it's pointing to the fact that this matters, right? We get it. Claris gets it. And so it's really exciting to see these upgrades.
Yeah, this 19.5 release, 400, bug fixes, 150 of which they documented. That's a huge number. And they're saying this is their best release ever. So
that's awesome.
Let's make sure it lives up to it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one of the ones that I liked was the cancel backups, and again, it made me.
Oh yeah.
It makes me giggle a little bit, because I have built dialogues that you can't get out of, right? And I know what that feels like as a user when I get mad about that. So, again, it feels like a little thing, but it is a game changer, right? Other than just processing power and what it's doing on the back end, as a user, it can be frustrating when you don't have that kind of control.
No, definitgoing
and if you're running a long backup, you're going to be sitting there a while, and things like doing migrations are going to be a problem if you're in the middle of a backup. If you need to do a migration, you can't. If the files are being backed up, they can't be migrated. They're going to fail.
Yeah. So, if that backup hits container data, you're into it for hours. So having that cancel rather than crashing the scripting engine, that's a much safer way of operating.
Yep. Totally. Very cool.
Yeah, and then OData. That's another great one. They finally extended that function out to the rest of the platforms. So Linux, Mac, and Windows all share OData as an option to gather and set data. I think OData also allows you to change some schema settings as well.
It does. Yep. You can create fields, drop tables. You can blow up your database.
No big deal.
We just did a podcast.
The usual.
We just did a podcast with John Renfrew, which may have been out by the time this goes, or maybe coming after this goes. I don't know what the schedule sequence will be, but we get into some of the OData stuff, and there's a lot of subtlety there in terms of what benefits it brings. And we've been excited to try it for a long time, but the fact that it was only Linux meant that a lot of our customers just wouldn't be able to use it. So, it'll take a little while for 19.5 to become the default server that everybody's using, or the minimum server everybody's using. But once that happens, OData is a pretty compelling replacement to FileMaker Data API. for many of its use cases.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for those who don't know, OData is the Open Data Protocol. So it gives a nice data standard that other services and tools can consume.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we talked to John, I was not knowing a lot about OData myself. It was cool to hear about it's universal and other people know about it. And when he compared it to Execute SQL when we got that, and being able to do select statements. And when you start getting things that other people understand, you're like, this is awesome, right? Like that means that there's documentation already out there. I can go tap into other communities. And that to me is pretty important, right? It doesn't limit us to just our own little space. We can reach out. We can see how other businesses, other people are taking advantage of these different techniques and approaches.
Yeah. So what else we got here?
Let's see.
Save a copy as XML on the server is nice.
Yes.
That's for like FM comparison, getting your save as copies done quicker, because that can take quite a long time on if you have a big file on a server. Doing that save as XML can take a while. Doing it on the server can be quite a bit faster.
I think I saw someone post some stats on that, saying it took
Vince. I think
90
Vince Manano
seconds
from
or something like
Beeswax.
that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Vince has a blog post. We can link to that. Link to the notes on that. But that's going to open up a whole new space for analysis tools, but also for things like FM comparison. Just being able to get those files that you can diff much faster and more often and automated. Like you can set up a server-side script now that will just save a copy as XML onto your server, and then so you don't have to. You can just have one every day if you want, and that'll save you the step of having to get a backup and then downloading it, opening it, save as XML, and then using that to do the diff. A lot of stuff goes away if we just standardize on how that gets done.
Yeah. Hey, and a quick shout out that FileMaker Comparison 1.0 just came out. It's officially out, and anyone can download it. And Todd hit some magical button that reset all of the licenses so that anybody can try it, even if they've tried FM Perception before, because it's bundled with that. So definitely worth mentioning that.
Yep, FM Comparison is a companion to FM Perception, so FM Perception licenses or FM Perception trials will work with FM Comparison. You don't need a separate purchase or trial. It'll just work right along with it.
This is where we need the mug that has the logo on it, so I could show it as we talk about it.
Yeah, I have logos. We should make some mugs.
So, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the 19.5 release also fixed the IDP endpoint, appending the :443 to it.
Yes.
So, Otto has a nice little feature. That can now work. Yeah.
So 19.4 introduced custom OAuth, which was nice. Right? It was 19.4, 19.4.1, 19.4.2, something like one of those. Did these custom OAuths, which meant that you could either use any OAuth system that was out there, or frankly make your own if you cared to, and make that work with FileMaker Server to be your identity server instead of Microsoft Azure, which was really the only one that in my mind was worth doing was Microsoft, because the others weren't gaining very much. So that was great, but it had this one bug in the form you fill out now on the server for the IDP endpoint. One of the endpoints you have to say, here's, to get to get the tokens, I think it was, you put this URL. This URL, FileMaker Server is going to call this URL to get your tokens, and that would not accept a port. It would not accept a port, so you could only do port 80 or port 443, which are the standard ports. The problem is that lots of people like to use ports for running other servers or other services on their machines, like Auto, for example. So Auto runs on port 3030. So now that 19.5 is in place, we now have custom OAuth for Google Groups. So we built a custom OAuth implementation that uses Google Groups for the group feature inside of the OAuth stuff for FileMaker Server and for your FileMaker clients. So this makes it pretty easy to set up any Auto server to use Google Groups as your security layer for that. That's a big deal because otherwise it was a major pain to do. And so now it's pretty easy. The only thing you have to do is get a special credential file from your Google admin console, which we have some documentation about how to walk through and get that. Once you have that, you install that on Auto, and you can use Google Groups for your groups inside of FileMaker Security.
And
Pretty
for
sweet.
those who are not familiar with Google's OAuth and FileMaker, you had to add every individual email address into every individual file.
Yeah.
And now you can just do a group.
Yeah,
as
you can just
group
make a
admin.
group in your Google Groups. It's like, FileMaker admins or FileMaker users or sales. And then membership in that group will allow them to access to a given file, which is great. So yeah, that's a good one. What else we got on here? What's WebDirect workers? What does that mean?
WebDirect workers are the worker machines that you can deploy alongside of your FileMaker server to take the brunt of the incoming WebDirect load. So it takes that traffic off of your FileMaker server, letting your FileMaker server serve out data to these worker machines as well as the FileMaker clients. And then, you can have, I think it's 5 WebDirect workers per FileMaker server at this point.
Right. So this is basically what was there, but they just made a change to it.
Yep.
They're getting
So
rid of
instead-
special ports. That's what they're
Yes.
doing.
So
now
instead
it
of
doesn't-
opening up, 16,001
Yeah.
through 3 or 4, it's all over 443 now. So it's going to save you some rules in your firewalls and some headache trying to figure out or remember which ports you need to open across firewalls if you're implementing in a secure network.
Yeah, I think this is more and more cloud kind of thinking. Cloud, you just have servers. You don't really have ports. Like the ports are the standard ports. And so people are running less and less things on individual boxes. And so, you're seeing less and less ports. And it also means less and less rules and firewalls, which is really, less and less things to set up. And that could be a real problem. In fact, that's one of the things we run into with Auto on port 3030. And in fact, Angelo and I have been working on ways to see if we can get rid of the special port even for Auto, because it's still, I was dealing with a customer yesterday who they work for the Department of Defense. They have crazy firewalls in place, and it's not that they can't set it up, but to get it set up is, government security bureaucracy to get it set up, right? So if it's just over the standard ports, that goes away. So it's about removing friction, really. So it's a good move, even though they didn't really change any capabilities here. They just made it easier for those types of environments to be able to use these extra features without having to fill out forms and sign on the dotted line and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. And then
all right.
Server
So what
updated
else
some
we
of
got
its-
here?
Yeah, Server updated some of its dependencies. OpenSSL got a nice upgrade to address some bug fixes and vulnerabilities. Node.js got an upgrade to version 16.
Great.
In case anyone runs any custom node on their FileMaker server. Socket.io and OmniOrb as well. But yeah, overall a really good mix of security, performance, and functionality came with the server release.
One of the
then
ones
So
I
the
was
one-
curious
had
about
a-
was
a-
the. One of the ones
ahead,
I was
Martha.
curious about was the summary field processing. So,
Yeah.
my eyes got really big when I heard about it, and then I read some of the limitations, and then my eyes got a little bit smaller. I
a
wonder
lot
if
of
it's an
caveats
introduction
with
into. Yeah, and I wonder if it's a good introduction into doing this, right? So maybe this is just V1 of many, hopefully. But the idea is that there's some pretty big limitations, right? So let's just to paint the scenario. Sometimes summary fields are slowing us down as users, and so the idea is that some of this can be offloaded to the server now. Does that sound right?
Yeah. So if your host or server CPU usage isn't higher than 25% when the summarization begins, it'll work. If your found set to summarize is larger than 25, it'll work there. Sort is I can't remember what the sort option is. There's another sort option there. In any event, summary field is not a global field. Summary field is not an unstored calc requiring client computation, like a plugin. or anything like that. We're not using ESS in this.
Right.
So several restrictions before it will calculate on the server. But that being said, it should do a large chunk of summarization server side.
Yeah, and we also don't want to go the other way where we start bogging down the server with everything that our users are doing, right?
Yeah.
So I get the caution too, right? My eyes might have gotten a little bit smaller, but I also don't want my server crashing because everyone's running their summary fields on the server. So I get it.
Yeah, some summary fields are always, they're great until they start killing you. So this is, again, getting into these sort of background processes. What we end up doing a lot more is instead of doing summaries real time, we do summaries and store the results. Mm-hmm. So now we can run those summaries in the middle of the night when it's under 25% and just store it. And then the users, because we think that everything has to be real time. It's usually not the case. It depends obviously on the data, but like if you want the total number of sales last month, guess what? It was the end of last month was the last day you needed to calculate that. You don't need to calculate it again. If you take an approach where you think about what things actually do need to be real time, and what can be offloaded using things like simple queue or other processes that store things when the server's not being hammered by users, then you don't have these problems. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you actually do need it, and it's real. Like you have to have it. It's now. This is the real data. I can't have it 10 minutes old, or 20 minutes old, or 5 minutes old. I need it now. And so now you can get it. And if you've done the other things to your system to make sure that it's running efficiently and effectively, the server will save your butt here by making that much faster for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
FileMaker
absolutely.
Server will take advantage of your multiple CPU cores and your RAM availability now. So it will eat up and utilize as much as it can.
We haven't talked
all
about this,
good.
but with the new version with 19.5, Angelo, have you had to make any changes as to or did Claris make any suggestions on what kind of servers people should spin up with 19.5, or is it all about the same as previous versions? Any changes in configs?
I believe they are now asking for a minimum of 4 CPU cores with the 8 gig of RAM for a minimum deployment.
Okay.
Now, that also depends on many factors. It depends on how many files you're hosting, how many users are connecting, which technologies they're using to connect, and again, how heavily hit those files are going. So there's some leeway in those numbers. We played with that quite a bit, and found that you can deploy as little as a single core 2 gig of RAM server and have regular FileMaker access happening on that, and then as soon as just for 1 or 2 users, dev box, whatever. But as soon as it starts to get hit harder, we need to scale that up.
Got it. Okay.
But that new recommendation was an increase. So that's where you should start for a good production system.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
And does it matter? I would imagine it also matters whether it's a VM or bare metal or like a container. Probably makes some difference
Definitely.
too.
You'll have performance hits on VM and container versus bare metal. Obviously, bare metal gives you all of that hardware to the process. Virtualization stacks usually have a little overhead, although it's gotten very, very good at passing through over the years. But yeah,
Okay.
performance is better.
Cool. All right. What about some pro stuff? I love this one just because it's fun to say out loud, which is perform script on server.
Yeah. Yeah, this was one they rolled out and then rolled back.
Okay.
And the reason it's rolled back is not because it doesn't work, but because it's confusing. So they're looking for maybe better language or better ways to, and also because when you use it by default, let's see, I'm going to get this wrong. It set it up so that it would not run on server by default. And well, let me back up and say what this is. So if you ran perform script on server before, and you were already on a server, it didn't start a new thread. Like it didn't actually begin another process on the server. In fact, I think it might just fail. Like I think you have to check.
Yeah,
it just fails, right? So it didn't work, and it certainly didn't start a new thread. So what this new option does is it says if you want to run something, if you're already running on the server, either with script schedules or with a PSOS script, and you run another script step that says perform something on server, it will actually boot up a whole new thread for you to run on, a whole new client process for you to run on. That's really cool, but if you think about that just for a minute, you can probably imagine some scenarios where you will bury your server really quickly. You've got some kind of looping script that's like every time it loops through, it's setting up a new PSOS session, and before you know it, you've hit your max, whatever your limit is, and your peg. So there was some caution there, and so the caution was to turn it off, like when you like that. It's kind of where a lot of the discussion was around, like like when you do get next record and exit after last is checked off. It really should be checked on, but it's checked off when you do that. How many bugs? Like how many times have I forgotten to check that box? Well, this was kind of it was going, I thought, the right way. But anyway, there's been some discussion about what is the clearest way to describe what's going to happen here, and also for old solutions coming forward, will they have this script step? Because it's not a new script step; it's a new option on the script step.
Yeah.
What will happen by default? And so, those were the cases where they just wanted to take some more time to figure that out. But it's available. Using a feature flag, which we'll have some notes in the blog, in the show notes about how to do that, or we'll link to somewhere that does, so that you can turn it on and you can actually try it. Eventually, they'll figure out what to call it, how to name it, and it will become a real thing. And this could be very useful, again, with these background processing, right? So let's take a simple example of maybe you want to send a bunch of emails. And emails is weird because you might hit a spam monster if you do, like you might get tagged as a spammer if you do this, but let's just use that as the example. And it sends, you could send a bunch of emails and you could do one at a time looping through it. And you could do that on the server and it would be pretty quick, but it would still be one thread. But you could decide that I want to go up to 4. I want 4 threads or 5 threads or 6 threads sending emails or doing whatever it is. You got to think about how you can do that, because now you're actually doing things in parallel. Before we didn't really have an option to do it. Now we have the option to do things in parallel. We can do what's called fanning out. So we can take a long list of things to do, and we can fan it out amongst a bunch of FileMaker threads that would do that in parallel. So definitely we'll have some uses, but I think people should be cautious about what that means, because normally in FileMaker we think a lot about things being synchronous. They only happen in a particular sequence. PSOS has already given us the ability, by doing that not waiting for result thing, right?
Yeah.
It's already given us the ability to let things happen and then keep moving on, which means those things that are happening may not be done. We're on the next step. So you run into that synchronous asynchronous issue. So this is just another layer on top of this. Now you have asynchronous and concurrency. You have multiple things that are running. So, but great to have the option, and it'll be useful for certain things. I can imagine SimpleQ having some kind of built-in support. So you could say for SimpleQ, like on some of the channels that you're listening for, webhooks and things to come in on, like it's okay to process this with 3 threads. Like you can do 3 threads on this, and have some way to limit it, because I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good one.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Nice.
Now, didn't they add a new security requirement on calling FMP URLs in the Pro version? So I think you have to specify or allow hosts.
Allow the host that's sending it. Mm-hmm. Yep. The URLs. Yeah. So there's a new pop-up, a new dialog that will hit you, and you have to say okay for that. That's reasonable to do that, because URLs are a way. I mean, they're commonly actually links in general. There's a whole universe of dark arts around how to use links to hijack people's stuff. So people should. This makes sense to have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they added that to WebDirect last release for the home URL on exit.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
And I
That's
should
right.
say
I forgot
that
about
where those are, once you accept that URL, you can manage that in your preferences. There's a new thing for permitted there that you can use to manage those.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
What else we got from 19.5 host Pro? So
the live text was beautiful.
Oh,
live
yeah,
text
but
and
Todd gets
QR
grumpy
code.
about this because it's
I
Mac
get grumpy
only.
about this. Well, it's Mac only and it's not server side, and I want these to like
Right.
really. If think about like I actually we had this. I worked at actually it was when I actually went in house for a short period of time, and what we were doing was we were basically processing photos from like Little League and baseball shoots and like so we'd go set up and all the teams would come and they'd take their pictures. And we had this system that we'd take a picture of the kid holding a form, and that form had a QR code on it. And on the form they would have filled it out with their name and stuff. And we had a system that would actually read the QR code out of that picture. And so we would know the next 10 pictures were the kid or that particular kid.
Yeah.
And we had to do that we used plugins to do that. So now you can do that in FileMaker on the Mac. You could do something similar where you could have paper forms that have QR codes that just get read. So you can imagine all kinds of things where paper is still part of the equation, where that just goes away. We did something like this for one of the clients, Martha, that you have. That was before you joined, but we did that for one of our clients. We have a similar system where they could read QR codes out of PDFs essentially. So that's great, but it's Mac only, and that means we can't do it on the server. So if we go to the server, we have to use a different process to do it.
Right.
So love to have it on the Mac. If you got to do it on the server, there's other ways to do it. You can do it using, node processes, for example, node's probably the easiest way to do it. Would be some kind of node process to do it.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, there is a node library for
there is
text OCR. Yeah,
text OCR scanning from looking for QR codes, identifying where they are, and then reading them. There's a lot of libraries for that. So you could do it on the server, but then you have to have it on the server. I think there are a lot of these Mac only ones that are because Mac has these core features built in.
Yeah.
Actually, I wonder if get live text and read a QR code actually work on Mac servers. I bet they don't, but I don't actually know the answer to that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to try out.
Some listener, let us know.
Yeah, please.
Let us
The
know.
get live text is cool though. I mean, the fact that you can again Mac only, but the fact that you can just pull text. I mean, we're probably all used to this on our phones at this point.
I use this all the time.
Yeah, an address,
all the time.
a phone number. Yeah.
I mean, tech support. People will send a screenshot of their license, and I'm like,
nice.
I used to be like, I have to try to read it and type it correctly to find their license so I can reset it or do some or send them a renewal or something like that. And now I just double click on the thing and boom, got my thing. It's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. The small features, the record slider, empty tab order, preserve empty tab order for copied objects was a nice little thing. Changing your license, easier to install a different license. Those are some small ones. What else?
There's a new JSON function, isn't there?
There is. That's right. There's a new JSON function. So this is get element type, which is useful for, some of the struggles we still have with JSON and FileMaker is the difference in types and the difference in what a JSON type is. First of all, there's no date would be one thing, things like that. But also, it's really hard to tell the difference between a number and a string. It can be very difficult.
Right.
So getting these functions to be able to help you especially if you're doing something where you don't actually know the shape of the JSON you're processing, and you need to walk through it, and so you won't know what the property is. Like you can list all the properties in an object and then loop through and say, give me the first object, give me the first property, what is it? Oh, it's an object. Okay, now I know what to do and I can process it. Oh, it's an array. Now I can do it. Oh, it's a string. So it helps you with those kind of things quite a bit.
Yeah, nice. It's always good to see the JSON library of options get better in FileMaker.
Yep. JSON is it's one of those things. It's like it is the international standard for data formats around the globe. Mm-hmm. So anything we can do to improve that is great. It's one of the things that whenever I get a chance to bug the engineers, I'm always bugging them for more JSON stuff because there's. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, hopefully, which I've passed on. Hopefully, some of them will get there. But yeah, because we're going to be doing more JSON. It's not like we're ever going to be doing less JSON. Like, it's just the way things are going to be. So, anything we can do there would be helpful.
Yeah.
Now, weren't there a couple of gotcha changes in some of the functions? The quote and then.
Quote is processed differently, yeah, right. But I think they're going to revert these, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't have the notes on the. There's two gotchas that I know of: the validate and quote function.
That was the other one. Yeah.
Record unique
validation.
Unique validation, and the quote is doing things a little differently, and I believe both of these will be reverted in a point release soon. So, good to know. Yeah, this is a pretty big release. A point releases usually follow pretty quickly after them, so I don't think it'll be too long for them to get these 19.5.2 out. Hopefully, I think we might have touched on everything. I don't know that we might have missed. Oh, the data migration. This is actually important. We should mention this. Okay. So, there's a new version of the data migration tool, and it's a little bit different than in times past. The data migration tool, and so it used to be that we got a new version of data migration tool. It would work with older versions of Server and older versions of FileMaker, and that is not true in this case. So, 19.5 servers need to go with data migration tool 19.5, which for us very specifically means auto 3.3 or greater. So there's this dividing line for the first time here where the data migration tools don't work with earlier versions. At least I can say that for certain on Ubuntu, and I believe it's on the other platforms, but I can't remember if I really thoroughly banged on all of them. But it just was clear when I was doing this testing that you really want to pair 19.5 server with 19.5 data migration or auto 3.3. Which includes the 19.5 data migration. So that's important. So if you're using auto, do not upgrade 19 to 19.5 without upgrading auto, and don't upgrade auto without upgrading FileMaker Server to 19.5.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A little confusing. We've had some people have issues with that, but yeah, it's a hard line. Upgrade those two together, and you'll be all set.
Okay. I did want to mention that the Claris engineering blog came out with 4 or 5 new blog posts around 19.5, so it's definitely worth checking those out. They do a really good job of going into detail on some of these things. A little bit about Ubuntu. They talked about some OAuth sign-ins, so there's some really good content there for anyone who's looking for a little more stuff to dive into.
Yeah, it's good content there. It's really great to have them doing that. That wasn't always the case. It's been one of the things they've added as part of their more modern way of working, is to be more agile about what they ship, not only in terms of the product itself, but also documentation and help. Right?
Yeah.
Doing a help system is one thing, but keeping it up to date with regular engineering blog posts and like why things are happening is super useful to help people get the context for why things are moving so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? These changes are coming fast, and it can be a bit much. I think, for those of us who are excited about new features, getting to the next version is always fun. But if you're in production, it used to be like if you're in production, you could wait like a year, right?
Yeah,
before you shift. I don't think you need to wait a year, but you probably can wait a month or two, maybe 3 months, before doing, maybe even 6 months before doing one of these major upgrades if you're a cautious person. And by that time, they'll get some of these new fixes that come out. Things are moving faster. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to update the minute things come out. If there are security releases, which do happen, you do need to jump on those security releases. But unless there's something you absolutely need to do, like a new feature, like you're gonna adopt OData and you have a Mac server, well, then you got to be on 19.5. You can wait, and it's okay to wait and make sure that you're doing these things in a planned manner. But waiting for years is an anti-pattern, and you can find yourself stuck. And we get calls from clients all the time who are on old versions, and they've got major investments in them, and to move would be a major investment, and they kind of have to move because hardware has moved on. Eventually, you can't get FileMaker to work on an old piece of hardware or whatever it is. So it's useful to stay up to date. Certainly within the supported versions of FileMaker, you want to stay on one of those. Don't want to drop back to one that is past its EOL, its end of life. But it's fine if you want to wait 3 or 4 months after a new release before you migrate. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
This also pushes the point. Sorry?
Nope, go ahead.
I was going to say, this also pushes the point for having dev environment, staging environment, production environment separately. So you can do your dev work, push to a staging environment, check your platform with your release, and then go from there as well.
That allows me to blow up my database with OData on somewhere safe.
That's right.
So, that would be great. Angelo, if you could spin me one up, I'd really appreciate it.
That's a very good point. Start doing dev on it, move it to staging, run it on staging, and then you'll have a pretty good idea.
Yeah. And then Claris has been pretty open about agile process, moving quicker. You were just pointing to that. You were just talking about this, Todd. And they are talking about 19.6 already. So they really are keeping us up to date and letting us know what's coming next. I know 19.5 was really, really big for them, and we can see why. But 19.6 looks like it's going to be pretty awesome itself. Yep,
it does. There's some fun things. I guess they've already mentioned that they're looking at support for transactions, which is like built-in native support for transactions. It's actually a weird thing because they've always been there, but they're going to make it easier to understand, easier to use. So looking forward to that as well. I don't know when that's scheduled to drop, but sometime in the not too distant future, as things have been going recently.
Yeah, exactly. It's just nice to see things moving and to see, I want the current stuff to be great. I want the stuff that's coming soon to be really great. And then I want the stuff from there. I want to know that it's coming too, right? So it just doesn't want to feel stale. So that's some good stuff.
Exciting.
So I don't know. Did we cover everything? Is there anything left to say, Angelo? Martha?
I think we've covered quite a bit.
I think so. I'm sure we'll find an excuse to talk about one of these or a few of these more. And if anyone listening has any other insights that want to come on and talk about it, we're happy to wax philosophical or practical about any of these things.
Yeah, if you have ideas of topics you'd like us to cover or topics you'd like to come on and cover with us, we'd love to hear. Let us know.
Absolutely. All right, awesome. All right, 19.5, big deal. We're excited about it. Server's the center of the FileMaker world these days. So we're seeing some proof of that. So there's some really good stuff here. Awesome. Yeah. As always, thank you both. And can't wait till we do this again.
All right. Thanks very much. Bye, guys.
Thanks,
have a good night.
Bye. Just as a reminder, this is available on YouTube and as a podcast. And make sure you check out the show notes as there are a lot of links to share there. If you can take a minute to pause and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. But better yet, if you can share it with a friend, that would be pretty awesome. No matter what your role is in this community, you're proof of how amazing this Claris community really is. My job is to help spread your knowledge and your stories on the podcast. Find me on Twitter at MZ123 or at ProofGeist, and let's share your story.